Life is a series of negotiations. Today, we're going to discover how to negotiate so that you get the results you want and everybody walks away happy, at least satisfied. And we have with us a master of negotiation, Jonathan Smith. And Jonathan is the author of Fight Less, Win More. And Jonathan works with the Black Swan Group along with Chris Voss, a good friend of mine. So really happy to have you on the show, Jonathan. And if you would, give us a little of your background. How'd you get into negotiation?
Thanks for having me, Tom. I actually identify myself as an entrepreneur. So I'm not a hostage negotiator like our friend Chris, but I have been his Expert EOS Implementer for the last 10 years and business strategist. And since I spent so much time with him, I decided that we needed to have a book to go along with Never Split the Difference, written from an entrepreneur or business person's perspective, and try to make it easier for people to onboard the skills. Because Chris is the master. I happen to be one of his students.
He is the master. And in fact, sometimes I listen to Chris and I'm going, yeah, I don't think I could ever do that. That's not in my skill set. Negotiating hostage negotiations would never be. I don't know that I have the emotional IQ for that. That is a tough animal, but that is part of this, right? Is the emotional IQ. And one of the things you identify in your book is how successful negotiations are about them and not you. And I pick up on that because when people ask me I'm on stage a lot and they say, how do you not be nervous? And I said, just remember, it's about them, not you. So talk about that just a little bit. What do you mean by that? By the negotiation is really about them?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We call our version of negotiation tactical empathy. And so let's break down empathy versus sympathy. So when we say sympathy is really about you. It's like, hey, Tom, you show up and you have a cold. And I say to you, oh, I had a cold last week and it was a terrible cold and I got stuck in bed. And no one ever feels good about that kind of sympathy. But if I say to you, hey, Tom, you're probably all stuffed up. You probably didn't even want to come to work this morning. You have no energy. It probably feels like you have no energy. All of a sudden it's about you. Like I'm making it about you. That's empathy. And sympathy is about me. So that's what we're talking about, making it all about the other party.
Okay, so let's kind of break that down if we can.
Sure.
How do you take yourself out of it? How do you make it, let's focus on them and not because when you're negotiating, you're negotiating because some part of it is about you. So how do you get away? How do you pull out of that so that you can say, hey, we're going to focus on your issues and solve your problem, with the idea that if we get through this properly, we'll solve my problem too.
It starts with the fact that the other person has to feel heard. And when you go into a negotiation, you are a threat. And your goal is to remove yourself as a threat in the negotiation. And what we have is a series of skills to help you do that. The first and foremost, most important skill is that you need to listen. And that sounds so simple, but I need you to listen. Actually, someone's saying something for a reason. The most basic type of listening we're talking about is listening for logic. Like they're saying something. There's a reason they're saying that to you. You may not agree with what they're saying, but you need to acknowledge what they're saying. Too many people enter a conversation and I say it's like being in the classroom and their hand is up and they're just waiting for you to take a breath. We call that listening to hijack. Take the spotlight away. And in a perfect world, you can listen for their point of view and acknowledge their point of view. So they actually completely feel heard. Oh, I understand. You really understand me. And we start with some skills. One of the skills is a label. And a label to us is you have an intuition. I have an intuition about you, Tom. And whatever that intuition is, I'm going to verbalize that intuition. A lot of times we don't verbalize that intuition. And a label to us starts with, it seems like, it sounds like, it feels like, it looks like. So that is what we would start with. And the label itself, people are afraid to label things from their intuition. And the reality is the urge to correct is irresistible. So if you get it wrong, they'll just tell you you're wrong. And if they get it right, they're going to say you're right. Or they're going to say that's right, not you're right. That's right.
So you're saying there's really no risk.
There's no risk.
That's really interesting. So, because I think people would hesitate to say something like that. And intuition, it seems like, this about you, because they're worried about, I mean, the reason people are scared of being on stage is that they're worried about being rejected, right? So what you're saying is, hey, all they can say is, no, that's not right. Okay. So let's say they do say, no, that's not right. Let's say your intuition is not correct. Then what?
They're going to correct you and they're going to tell you what it is. And when they tell you what it is, they're more likely to tell you the truth. Like, because they don't even have time to make up a story. They're going to just go, no, that's not right. It's this. I'm not nervous. I'm just distracted because something just happened at home. Now, that is what we call a black swan. They're going to give you a piece of information that you didn't have before you started that negotiation.
Interesting. So, and when you talk about listening, so you get right into listening right off the bat. I think from reading Chris's book, I think you have a different view of listening than most people have of listening. So can you kind of walk us through how you think listening, how do you go beyond the superficial listening?
So I'll tell you what our 5 levels of listening are. Listening for the gist. I'm on the phone and going, yeah, okay, Tom. Okay, Tom. Like, there's no way you think I'm listening to you. I'm just blowing you off. I'm like, I'm in a meeting. You're not important. Second is that listening to hijack that I talked about. It's super annoying. You're in a meeting and someone's just waiting to speak and they don't even acknowledge what you just said. Neither of those are effective. The third level of listening is listening for logic. We're in a meeting, someone says something, and I say, it seems like there's a reason you're asking. All of a sudden, they're like, oh, there is. It's like the HR person who doesn't want to share the name of the person or the incident that happened, and all of a sudden they share all the details because they're hiding the information. The next level, the fourth level, is listening for logic and emotion. So, like, not only is there logic involved, but there's emotion involved. So it's another level of listening. Requires a higher level of acuity. And then the fifth level of listening is listening for their point of view. What is their worldview? So Chris will describe it as being in the Philippines and negotiating with a terrorist and being able to acknowledge what their worldview is. He doesn't have to agree with it. But when he says, your people have been oppressed for the last 16 years. You don't think we should have bases here. You feel disrespected. All these things. All of a sudden, he's like, "Oh my God, I'm finally understood. They're not just shooting at me. I'm finally understood." And it's very difficult to stay in that level of listening, in that point of view. But with your clients, Tom, if you can I've done this with billionaires, staying in their point of view and understanding their point of view, all of a sudden, you have trust-based influence at that point. That's what we're trying to get to.
Hmm. Okay. So how do you get there? I mean, like, I that sounds hard to me, right? How do I listen for their point of view? How do I listen? How do I identify logic and emotion? Are there things you can look for that, or words that you might be listening for that tell you that?
Wow. So what I like to say about these skills is it's like learning another language. The best way to do it is through immersion. You'll have heard Chris tell you, you have to do low stakes practice first. So you have high stakes confidence. So the book is written, it has 18 different chapters of 18 different skills in them. There's four primary skills that we have. One of them is being the label we discussed. And you have to start practicing these skills. The other thing is you have to be mindful. Like I have to be willing to walk into a conversation. Sometimes I'll meditate before I go into a conversation because I want my head to be clear. You are 31% smarter in a positive frame of mind. We can make sure you're in a positive frame of mind before we walk into the conversation. You're much more likely to be able to listen and catch yourself when you're listening to Hijack because you are going to have that urge. We all do. We have to accept the fact that we are going to be triggered and then be kind to ourselves if we are, and then try to go back to listening at a minimum for logic.
So it almost sounds like you're saying that you have to step back a little bit so that you can get out of that triggered response.
100%. You have to somehow, in an ideal world, I'd have someone I could vent with before I had that triggered response. So I would talk to someone and I would be able to say all the bad things I want to say before I get in the conversation so it doesn't come out sideways.
Get it out through process it.
You have to
Like that.
process it.
I like that. Now, one of the skills you talk about is silence. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think silence is an amazing tool because people hate silence.
Yeah, so we call it dynamic silence. And we say, if you're going to drop a skill, like for example, if I were to use a label or a mirror. So I would say a mirror might be dynamic silence or silence. I would say silence to you. And then I would just be silent and wait for you to tell me what you think about how powerful that skill is. But you have to actually be disciplined about the silence because the natural sense is if I wait 3 seconds and you haven't said something, I'm already trying to make an excuse. Oh, that must have been too expensive for you. So let me explain to you why I came up with that price. And that may not be what the issue is. So the only time we want to break the silence is when we've clearly offended someone. If we've clearly offended someone, we need to apologize immediately. Or if the silence goes on to the point where it's clear that, it's time to break the silence. But that's like 10 seconds later, much longer than you would think.
So the point of silence is to keep them talking.
Yeah, they
So
will
they
break
tell
the
you more?
silence. They will, and you'll get a black swan. They will continue to talk.
So you mentioned they get a black swan, and I know that people who follow you know what a black swan is, but can you explain that term because you've used it a couple of times here?
Sure, a black swan is a piece of information that you didn't have walking into that conversation. And it may be a piece of information that they didn't anticipate providing you with. It's something they might have been hiding during the conversation, and it will help you in the course of your negotiation.
So how do you know when it's a black swan?
It's some very obvious thing where you're like, oh, now I understand why that
Okay.
they walked into the conversation and you think they're upset with you, and then they tell you, no, by the way, my daughter just got in an accident and she's on her way to the hospital, so I'm completely distracted. And you're taking it personally, and 90% of the time it has nothing to do with you.
So it almost sounds like it's an aha moment for you.
You could call it an aha moment. It's some piece of information like, oh, of course, that's like, there's a reason this person's calling me. Someone calls you and you're like, oh, it seems nice that they're just calling me, but there's really a reason they're calling you. And if you get them to give you the information why they're calling you, that's a black swan.
All right. And you're looking for black swans.
Yeah, so my mantra is to stay curious, and I'm hunting black swans by staying curious.
Got it. So you're hunting black swans.
Yes. And there's like 3 to 5 in every conversation you go into. So when you go in that conversation, you should be looking for black swans.
What does the black swan tell you? I mean, what's the advantage that you get when you hear those black swans? You're hunting black swans. What are you hunting for?
Additional information that gives me context in terms of how we're going to come up with a deal, how we're going to come up with a negotiated solution. Because sometimes the motivations you think people have are not the motivations that are actually driving them. So we say, don't be so sure about what deal you want that you wouldn't take a better one if offered.
So that's what you're looking for. Is that what is that better deal that you would take?
Yeah, what is that better deal you would take? And just keep your mouth shut and wait for them to respond. Just use dynamic silence. I had a deal last week where I thought it was a financial transaction. And they said, "How about if we send 1,000 books out on your behalf to our audience?" Which was far more valuable to me than whatever financial transaction I thought we were going to do.
I get it. I think I get that. Okay. So you also talk about negotiation being a process instead of like a single interaction. Are you talking about a process in a single conversation? Or are you talking about multiple conversations?
Multiple conversations. I think people are so desperate to want to get through a negotiation that they try to force it. And what I'm trying to say is be disciplined. There are times where someone's just not ready to make a decision. And you trying to force a decision isn't going to make it better. So for example, I was in a group last week teaching some of the skills. And we have this skill where we say, have you given up on? It's a no-oriented question. Have you given up on working with me? So I had everyone in the group say, have you given up on working with me? So someone gets a response. No, I haven't given up on working with you, but I've been very busy. I'll be back in touch. This is what he responds. And he said, so now what am I supposed to do? I got a response. Well, his response is basically, I'm not ready to work with you yet. So I said, send him a label. And the label will be, it seems like you have a lot of plates spinning in the air. It seems like you have a lot of plates spinning in the air. And the response that he got to the seems like you got a lot of plates spinning in the air was an emoji or a GIF with plates spinning in the air and no actual response other than that. And he's like, now what am I supposed to do? I'm like, keep your mouth shut, wait 2 weeks, get back in touch with the guy. He's not ready to talk to you, but he's willing to engage with you. So that is a good sign. He's just not ready. I know you want to make a deal today. You're anxious to make a deal, but if you try to force the deal, he'll run away.
So if you try to force the deal, he'll run away. When do you know you want him to run away? Because he's never going to make a deal.
Yeah, so we have a skill called proof of life. We want proof of life that there is in fact a deal on the other side. So proof of life looks something like this. When he gets on the phone with the person, of all the people in the world who you could work with who do what I do, why would you want to work with me? And then you want to get implementation from him. What would success look like at the end of the day? And if they can provide you implementation and vision of what it looks like, you have proof of life. And if they say, well, I just need a bid from you because I need a bid from 3 people, and he can't give you any idea of like that he's actually thought or that person's actually thought of working with you, you may want to cut bait at that point. And the idea is we say it's not a sin not to get a deal. It's a sin to spend a long time not getting a deal.
Amen. So you're wanting them to describe what their win is
Yes,
what it sounds like.
sounds right. That's right.
So you're having them sell themselves. You're the buyer, not the seller at that
I
point.
am. I am. And it's almost like the D.O.S conversation from Strategic Coach, getting them to give you the D.O.S conversation.
And for our listeners, explain what the D.O.S conversation is.
Dangers, opportunities, and strengths. So
There you go.
you would ask them 3 years from now, what are the dangers, opportunities, and strengths if we were to work together? What do we have to deal with? And what does success look like?
So a lot of times we think of negotiation as we're trying to convince them to do something. How do you respond to that? Is it persuasion, or is it letting, like we were just talking about, letting them sell you? Which is it?
Our version of negotiation is more coming in with an open mind and seeing where that person's at. We know what our parameters are to do a deal, but we need to see if that person actually wants to do a deal. So less persuading and more building trust-based influence so we can come up with a deal. People are 6 times more likely to want to do a deal with people they like.
You just said we go in knowing what the parameters are for us to do a deal. How important is that you actually know what your parameters are? I suspect a lot of salespeople, a lot of business owners, they go into a deal and they haven't even thought what their parameters are for doing a deal.
I like to have a buy box. I think of like, what would work for us? Chris and I were working on a deal this week, and I had a pretty good sense of what worked for him. I got it about 90% of the way there. And then he wanted more detail on specific things. So he took the deal from there. So I got it to 90%. And then he said, these 4 things are important to me. And I said, okay, you can speak to them and let's just nail those things down. I think we're pretty close.
So it sounds like there's a little back and forth there. And you may have some minimums for doing the deal, and so you won't even talk more if you don't meet if they can't meet those minimums, or because that's an obvious no fit, right? If they don't meet your minimums for doing a deal, there's an obvious no fit. If you get to 80%, 90%, whatever that is, okay, now at that point we can go, okay, let's see if we can negotiate those finer points.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing. And when I'm dealing with Chris or anyone else, like, he has certain things, he has experience I don't have with this specific type of deal. So he knows where he's gotten tripped up in the past, and those finer points are really important to him. So I'm like, let's make sure you get it right. I haven't done this with you enough times to know the lighting's important, where we stay is important, whatever the issues are that this was less about the dollars and more about some of the details about the contract.
Interesting. So it sounds like the more clear you are going in on what it works for you, the easier it is to then match it, see if it's a match with what they want.
And we want to do that really fast up front to see if there is an opportunity to explore possibilities. And if the fee they want to pay is nowhere near, like, in the ballpark of where we're going to get something done, like, let's just cut bait at that point.
It reminds me of a experience I had. I had a couple come in looking for tax services. This is years and years ago. And they're both doctors, both physicians. And I'm listening to them saying, it sounds like you want this, and sounds like this is what you want. So if we did this, that would work. Yes, that would work. And I said, okay, well, we can do all that. The price is $15,000. And the wife was the primary negotiator. And she goes, we'll give you 7. And I said, well, I appreciate that. The price is 15. Well, we'll give you 7. I said, well, this may not be a good fit then. Yeah, I think it's a good fit. We'll give you 7. So that up front. So let me go to that, because there's a lot of discussion in sales negotiations about price and when you talk about price. So do you talk about price up front in terms of a range, or do you wait like some sales professionals say, wait till the end and they've already purchased before you give them a price? Because it sounds to me like you're saying, wait a minute, we need to know if we're even in the same ballpark here.
Well, we start with an accusations audit. It's one of our skills. And it starts with, we're very expensive. I'm very expensive. So they're now like, think, I'm $100,000 for tax
So you're
services,
framing
whatever.
it.
Yeah, we're going to frame it and say, we're very expensive. Our minimum fee, let's say in your case, is $15,000. And if she says, well, there's no way I'm going to pay $15,000, you say, well, I have my cousin Sammy down the road who's happy to do it for 7. Go work with Sammy. Like, we didn't spend a long time with them. So that's how we would do it. Like, that's how I was working on this deal with Chris. I told them they know we're expensive when they come up.
Right. So you do. So you set that frame up front.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. All right. Let's finish with this. So we can't have a conversation about negotiation without talking about AI. You talk about AI. AI, I'm finding more and more that I dislike AI just because it seems like people are relying on like they're human and AI is not human. It is, I always tell them that A stands for artificial, meaning fake intelligence. It's not real intelligence. How does the whole AI world impact negotiations?
All right. So our version of negotiation is human to human. It's not a commodity bargaining tool around commodities. So it's not at the market where you're like back and forth and back and forth. That's what we call bargaining. I'm talking about you negotiating for your $15,000 fee for taxes. Now, the beautiful thing about AI is that we can use it for negotiation preparation. So I've built a bunch of AI tools around preparation. But Tom, you're still going to have to deliver the message that it's $15,000.
Right.
And what I can do is I can actually take someone's profile and come up with what their point of view would actually look like. What do they want to hear? How do they operate? And then provide you with preparation for the conversation. You still have to be able to deliver the skills. I've done it 400 times. I've now negotiated with like NYU, Langone, and then gotten them to give me pricing that was the same pricing as my insurance company for the things that the insurance company wouldn't cover. So it's a beautiful thing when used appropriately. We still, as humans, need to have conversations with people.
So you see it as something you use as a tool to prepare for the negotiation, but you don't ever see it coming as a primary negotiating tool. You don't see, for example, a future where uh, the negotiators are both AIs, bots.
In a bargaining system with commodities, maybe. Like, I think that's happening now. But high stakes negotiation, I don't think that works. I think the humans still will be involved, but
That makes total sense to me. I mean, if humans are buying, if it's a human that's it's making that decision, then it would appear to me that it would need to be a human that would negotiate that decision.
for sure. That's what I think.
That makes sense. So for our listeners, could you give us 2 or 3 first steps that you would take outside the obvious? Buy your book, Fight Less, Win More. But besides that, and I encourage that because I think books are great tools because you can keep going back to them and back to them, back to them. And I found Never Split the Difference sits on a key location in my shelf because I pull it out to reference it. So books are super. And I'm sure you go through all this in the book, but if you were to say, okay, here's 2 or 3 key things that you can do to just go, okay, this will make you a better negotiator. This will give you a leg up in the negotiation right from the start.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm not a hostage negotiator and I didn't train at Quantico. I had to figure out how to do this and learn it. That's why we wrote the book. But there are a couple key things that I did. Number one, I have a journal. I had a journal when I was learning, and I want you to journal
I
every
like that.
single day, one time, only one thing. So the high performers are like, "What I'm gonna write the 8 negotiations I had today, so I won't have to do it the journal for another 8 days." That's not the point. I need you to journal every single day for 365 days out of the year. That what was the negotiation you had? What was the scenario? What skills did you use? What was the outcome? How might you do it better? So that's one thing that I've used extremely effectively. Number two, I always have a swim buddy, an accountability partner, someone else who's walking the journey with you, who, when you actually have a scenario, either you're walking into something and you're nervous about, or you want to debrief after having been there, and they're there for you. And then the third piece is I really like, a lot of people are using the book and creating a book club out of it. And so, like, every week, you can read a chapter with a group, let's say a group of 10 or 12 people, and actually review the chapter, talk about wins and losses during the week. It's beautiful to have the journal so you can remember what your wins and losses were for the week. And I think the adult learning model is such that doing those three things, you will get better. But it's a journey, and you need to immerse yourself in the skills if you really want to own them.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I've got to ask you a question. You say you've been with Chris 10 years. How long were you there before you started feeling comfortable with this?
I didn't even start I didn't even understand the scales when I started with him. So it probably, it probably took like 5 years. Like, I wasn't like super committed to it at the time, but it took me once I committed to it, it took me 6 months to really start getting comfortable where the skills would just start rolling off my tongue. And I'm like, oh, I just did that subconsciously. I didn't even consciously think about it. It took me about 6 months of daily practice.
So it sounds like this is something, it's going to take some time, but it's going to be worth the effort because it becomes part of who you are. It sounds like it's become second nature to you.
Yeah, it's like one of the arrows in your quiver. Like, now you have it, it's available for you. Like, I always like to say, low stakes practice leads to high stakes confidence. So you'll have it when you really need it.
I love it. The book is Fight Less, Win More: How to Master Negotiators, how master negotiators influence hearts, minds, and deals. I want to get that subtitle right. Fight Less, Win More is the book. Where can we go for more information about your work?
So stay curious. JBS is actually my website. Stay curious. JBS.com is my website.
I love it. Thanks everybody for listening to our guest, Jonathan Smith, talk about the power of negotiation, including the power of listening and making it about them. When we make it about them, when we truly listen, when we know what our parameters are, we're always going to make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see you next time on the Wealthability Show. Thanks for listening to the Wealthability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealthability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.